Here begins the deposition of Matt Ledane. Today's date is November 18th, 2019. We are going on the record at 9:48 a.m. Will counsel please state your appearances for the record?
I'm Jeb Butler on behalf of Dan Gilreath.
Dave Davidson on behalf of Tri-State Concrete and Tracy Wayne Moore.
Matt Kahn on that plan.
Derek Swanson, McGuire Woods LLP on behalf of FCA.
Will the court reporter please swear in the witness?
Raise your right hand, please, Mr. Ledane. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
We may begin.
All right. Introduce yourself to the jury, if you would.
Hello, I'm Matt Ledane. I'm a retired executive that worked for Fiat Chrysler for 31 years.
When did you retire?
I retired August 31st of 2017.
Before you retired, what position did you hold immediately before you retired?
Immediately before, I was
Right.
the CEO of the NAFTA North America Magneti Marelli Parts Division of Fiat Chrysler and Vice President of Global Quality.
I think before that you had a role in the recall of some of these rear tank Jeeps. Do I remember that right?
I did.
Tell us about that, please.
Okay, that role would have been when I was in charge of vehicle development, concept creation, and regulatory affairs. That would have been starting in August of 2012.
I've marked as Plans Exhibit 92 what I think is a copy of your resume or CV. Look it over and tell me if that's correct, please.
It looks like my resume.
Why did you leave FCA in 2017?
Direct form?
To retire.
Was there any particular reason that you retired at that time?
Oh no, I had been planning for years to have the option of retiring at 55. With Chrysler, with over 30 years of service, you can retire at 55 with pension. And it was one of my goals for a long time to have the flexibility to be able to retire at 55.
Are you working now?
No, I am not.
When was the last time you updated the resume that's marked as Plans Exhibit 92?
I would have updated it prior to the last deposition that was in May, and the update was for the address, because we had moved our official address down to Florida at that, in between the last time I had the updated resume and this time.
You obviously updated it after you retired, right?
Correct.
Why did you do that?
I was getting inquiries from people to say, hey, if you're interested in doing something, I'd like your copy of your resume. So I just updated it to have it available.
Okay. Well, anyway, you now live in Florida, correct?
Correct.
And we are in Florida taking this deposition today, right?
Yes, we are.
Now, did you know, Mr. Ledane, that since you don't work for FCA anymore, you and I could have sat down and spoken in a less formal setting? Did you know that?
Object to form and object to the extent that suggests a legal conclusion.
No, actually, I did not know that.
Okay. Well, I sent you a letter that's now marked as Plans Exhibit 66. Take a look at that, please, and tell me if you remember getting it.
I do remember getting it, yes.
All right, I'm going to read it into the record. It says, I'm writing to you about the Jeep Liberties, Grand Cherokees, and Cherokees that were sold with rear-mounted gas tanks from 1993 to 2007, and that FCA recently retrofitted with trailer hitches. My understanding is that you were an executive at FCA but left the company in 2017. I represent a family in Hamilton, Ohio, who recently lost its mother when her Jeep Liberty, which had been outfitted with a trailer hitch, was rear-ended and burst into flames. The family's name is Gilreath, and we are currently in litigation against FCA. I'd really like to talk about your experience and recollections involving the rear tank Jeeps, NHTSA's recall request, and the negotiations that followed. I know you've left the company and would probably rather put those issues behind you, but these issues are crucially important to my client's case, so I have to send this letter. I would not ask otherwise. And then the last paragraph there gives my office number, cell phone number, email address, and mailing address, right?
Objective form foundation.
Correct.
Did you call me?
I did not.
Did you write to me by email or post?
I did not.
Did you sign a non-disclosure agreement when you left Fiat Chrysler Automobiles?
I did not.
Okay. Well, anyway, I followed up this letter that's marked as Plans Exhibit 66 with some emails to you. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
All right. I've marked as Plans Exhibit 67 a copy of one of those emails, and I say one of those only because I sent it to a bunch of addresses that I could find, some of which may have been yours and some of which probably weren't. But do you recall getting an email that in substance was like the one marked as Plans Exhibit 67?
I do.
Okay. And this is basically the same language, except it recites that at the end of the first paragraph, I wrote you a hard copy letter last week. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you call or write in response to this email?
I did not.
Did you forward the email to Fiat Chrysler's lawyers?
I don't recall, but I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I'm going to mark now as Plans Exhibit number 70 an email that I received from Fiat Chrysler's lawyers, and I'll ask you to look at the bottom there. The bottom email appears to come from someone named Elizabeth B. Wright, who's a partner, it says, at Thompson Hine LLP. Do you see that?
I see that name, yes.
And that says that Matt Ledane contacted us and said that someone on your behalf has been trying to make contact with him and other members of his family. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And then at the top there is, you can see my response, and that says I tried a few email addresses and didn't mean to contact his family members. My apologies for bringing them into this. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did Fiat Chrysler's lawyers forward this email exchange that's marked as Plans Exhibit 70 to you?
No, I don't believe so, no.
Okay. Well, anyway, if I did send emails to your family members, I apologize. I was trying to reach you. Is there a reason that you didn't call me or write to me in response to the emails or the letter?
Well, honestly, it was because I thought, because of the counsel we had had on previous cases, that we'd use the same one, so I contacted Derek. It may have been via text, and asked him, should I respond or should I work through Derek?
And what did he say?
We could work through Derek, and so that's what I chose to do.
Derek would be Fiat Chrysler's lawyer who's sitting to your right today, correct?
That is correct.
Last name Swanson, right?
Derek Swanson.
Did Mr. Swanson tell you that you should not or could not contact me?
I'm just going to object at this point, instruct you not to answer on the grounds of attorney-client privilege.
Do you represent Mr. Ledane?
Yes, I do.
Oh. Did you know that you were represented by Mr. Swanson?
I assume so, yes.
Do you have a... Now, you know, of course, that Mr. Swanson represents Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, right?
Correct.
Did you know that he represented you individually?
I assumed he was representing the company and by default me.
Do you have any kind of signed agreement saying that Mr. Swanson represents you as an individual and former FCA employee?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did you ask Mr. Swanson to represent you individually?
I don't recall doing that.
Did you pay him to represent you individually?
I have not.
Did he ever send you a letter saying that he represented you individually?
No.
Okay, so the question is, what did Mr. Swanson say to you when you asked whether you could contact me?
I'll again object and instruct you not to answer on the grounds of attorney-client privilege.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that you don't actually represent this witness.
Well, he communicated his understanding that I do, so you're incorrect, and he will not answer the question.
Well, I have to ask this then, Mr. Ledane. Are you going to take this lawyer's advice and refuse to answer the question?
Yes, he will.
I will.
You will. To avoid that question in the future, Mr. Swanson, would you like to stipulate that every time you instruct Mr. Ledane not to answer a question, he will in fact refuse to answer the question?
I don't know if I need to make that stipulation.
All right, well, we'll have to continue with that. Was it your understanding, Mr. Ledane, that you could not or should not speak with me?
Again, I'll to the extent that that requires disclosure of any attorney-client communication, you should not answer that question. If you can answer it otherwise, then you may.
Could you repeat it, please?
I can. Was it your understanding, Mr. Ledane, that you could not or should not speak with me?
Same objections and instruction.
I don't recall that.
Well, before this deposition, did you meet with Mr. Swanson or any other lawyer representing Fiat Chrysler Automobiles?
Before today?
Yes.
Yes.
When?
Saturday and Sunday with Derek Swanson.
All right. For how long did you and FCA's lawyer, Mr. Swanson, meet on Saturday?
It would have been maybe 3 hours.
For how long did you and Mr. Swanson, FCA's lawyer, meet on Sunday?
Like an hour and a half.
What did Mr. Swanson, FCA's lawyer, tell you during those meetings?
I'm going to go ahead and object on the grounds of attorney-client privilege and instruct you not to answer.
Mr. Ledane, are you going to follow this lawyer's advice and refuse to answer the question?
I will.
Well, you also testified in a case involving the fire in a rear tank Jeep in May of this year, 2019, right?
Object to form a foundation.
Correct.
Did you meet with FCA's lawyers before that deposition?
Yes, I did.
Why would you meet with lawyers for one side but refuse to meet with lawyers from the other?
Object to form and also object to the extent that calls for a legal conclusion.
That's just the way, since I worked for Chrysler, I thought or in the past, I thought that's what was the case or procedure.
Are you an engineer?
Yes, I am.
Are you a member of the National Society of Professional Engineers?
I am not.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Code of Ethics for Engineers established by that organization, the National Society of Professional Engineers?
No.
Let me show you the document, and I'll ask you the same question. I'm handing you now what's been marked as Plans Exhibit 65. And up at the top, it says Code of Ethics for Engineers, right?
I see that in the title.
And then on the left, it says National Society of Professional Engineers, correct?
Correct?
Does this look familiar to you?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Well, I'll ask if I just want to focus on a couple of small parts, and I'll ask whether you agree with them. You see Roman numeral number 1 in the top left. It says Fundamental Canons.
Form a foundation.
I see that heading.
All right. And then under Roman numeral 1, there's Arabic numeral 1, and that says hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Isn't that what it says?
Form a foundation.
That is what line item says.
Do you agree that that's something engineers should do?
Form a foundation.
Yes, I do.
And you can tell the other one I want to ask you about because it's highlighted. That says engineers should, quote, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner, end quote. Isn't that what it says?
That is what it
foundation.
says. Yes.
Do you agree that that's what engineers should do?
Form a foundation.
So I agree that's what people should do. Yes, engineers do.
Do you know Judson Estes, who, like you, is an engineer, who has for a long time worked for Fiat Chrysler Automobiles?
Form.
I do know Judd.
How do you know him?
From history, for the years, worked, crossed paths many times over the years.
Did you know that he conducted a lot of crash tests on these rear tank Jeeps?
Did form foundation?
I'm aware that he was involved in them. I didn't know what specific role he had.
I'm going to show you a video clip from a deposition of Mr. Estes, and I'll ask a couple questions about it when it's finished. Can you see that screen in front of you?
I can.
All right. Let me turn the volume up.
I'll just object that this is a proper impeachment.
Here it comes.
A gas tank that hangs 6 inches below.
Let me restart it.
Isn't it true that if you've got a gas tank that hangs 6 inches below the bottom of the fascia strip on the Jeep Cherokees and is just 11 inches inside the back of that fascia strip, that gas tank is obviously vulnerable to rear impact?
Objective form.
I wouldn't say it's obvious.
It is vulnerable to rear impact, is it not?
It is vulnerable to rear impact.
Thank you.
Had you seen that video clip before?
I had not.
Did you know that Mr. Estes had said that in his testimony?
I did know that.
You did?
I don't recall if the word vulnerable, but I remember that his testimony said something about the tank.
Okay. I'm going to show you another video clip now. You know also who Sergio Marchionne was, correct?
I do.
He was the CEO and chairman of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles.
Yes.
All right. We'll show you a clip from him.
This is also
the Object again that this is improper impeachment.
All right. Let me restart it.
All right, if you look at the, this is also the article where you were quoted as saying that the Jeeps with rear gas tanks are, quote, absolutely safe, close quote. Do you see that?
Yeah, I did see it.
Did you say that?
I did say it.
How many times have you said that?
I don't know.
Many times?
More than once.
Had you seen that video clip before?
I had not.
Did you know that Mr. Marchionne had testified that he said these rear tank Jeeps were, quote, absolutely safe, end quote?
I was not aware of that.
Okay. Well, Marchionne is not an engineer, or is he?
Not that I know of.
Well, what do you think about those two video clips?
Object form.
I actually don't. My opinion of Mr. Marchionne's is that I think from a safety standpoint, he is correct, because the tank was a placement with the structure around it to take the impact loads. Judd, I don't necessarily agree with what Judd said about it being vulnerable.
Would you agree that, as between those two video clips, somebody is wrong?
Object form.
I guess it would depend on if Judd overall later would say that it was overall safe vehicle, but the vulnerable term I don't agree with.
Okay. Is it your testimony that you believe the rear tank Jeeps were, quote, absolutely safe, end quote?
Object form.
My position and the company's position was that those tanks were in a location, that structure was around, they were safe, they met the objectives of the vehicle, and they delivered a safe vehicle.
Well, we know that Mr. Marchionne said the Jeeps were, quote, absolutely safe, end quote, right?
That's what he said.
Do you agree with that?
I believe they're absolutely safe for the use of the vehicle, meeting the standards that were applicable at the time.
Do you think the rear tank Jeeps were, quote, absolutely safe, end quote, in rear impact?
Object form.
Yes.
I think you also know Mark Chernobyl, is that correct?
I do know Mr. Chernobyl.
He, when you were the vice president for regulatory affairs, you reported to him, I think.
I did.
So he was your boss.
Correct.
Mr. Chernobyl reported directly to Sergio Marchionne, I think. Is that right?
Yes, he did.
And Chernobyl at that time was responsible for all engineering, quality, and regulatory affairs. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, regulatory affairs means interaction with NHTSA, right?
Yes.
And Chernobyl was directly involved in the decision to put trailer hitches on the rear tank Jeeps and then tell NHTSA about that. Isn't that true?
Object to form foundation.
He would have been involved, yes.
And you were also involved in that, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, we asked Mr. Marchionne about Mark Chernobyl's job responsibilities as well, and I want to show you what Mr. Marchionne had to say about that, and then I'll ask whether you agree with it. So here's that video clip.
Check that's improper impeachment.
Do you know how many Americans have died in wrecks where Chrysler Jeeps with rear gas tanks were hit in the rear and caught fire just since March 6, 2012, when Remy Walden died?
I do not.
Have you asked?
No, I have not.
Who at Chrysler Group or at FCA is supposed to keep up with that information?
We have a group of people who handle regulatory affairs and handle safety matters.
Well, if I wanted to call something, I know I can't call somebody up, but if I could and wanted to call somebody up and ask them that question, since you don't know,
Yeah.
how many Americans have been burned in rear impacts in the Jeeps with rear gas tanks since Remy died? Who would I call?
Marchionne.
Check to form foundation.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Ledeen, that Mark Chernobyl should keep track of the number of people who have burned in rear tank Jeeps?
Same objections.
I don't know if Mark would have had that data without asking for it. I don't know that.
Do you have any reason to disagree with what Mr. Marchionne said about Chernobyl being responsible for that information?
Check to form foundation.
It would fall under Mark's overall purview to be able to find out whether he had access to it immediately. I can't answer that.
NHTSA at one point asked FCA to recall a number of these rear tank Jeeps, correct?
Check to form.
That is correct.
I'm showing you now what's marked as Plans Exhibit 40. And Plans Exhibit 40 is a letter from NHTSA dated June 3, 2013, addressed to you, right?
That is correct.
You've seen this letter probably many times.
I have.
All right. On the first page there, it says, quote, ODI believes, that is the Office of Defects Investigation, believes that the model year 1993, 2004 Grand Cherokee and model year 2002-2007 Liberty contain defects related to motor vehicle safety. Do you see that?
Check to form.
Yes, I do.
And then it says ODI requests that Chrysler initiate a safety recall of these vehicles, right?
Check to form.
Yep, I see that.
I want you to turn with me not to 2, but to page 3. And I'll ask you about a few of the highlighted sections in there. At the very top, the first highlighted section says, throughout the 1980s, increasing numbers of new vehicle models appeared with fuel tanks located either above or in front of the rear axle. Chrysler itself incorporated midship tanks in new models. Do you agree with that?
I agree that we had multiple versions of tank locations.
Do you agree that throughout the 80s, increasing numbers of new vehicle models appeared with fuel tanks located either above or in front of the rear axle?
I agree that it was changing, but there were still many manufacturers with locations still active, the rear axle.
The statement is true, isn't it?
It is true.
Later on, the letter gives some examples of Chrysler products and says that the 1987 Dodge Dakota, 1994 Dodge Ram, and 1998 Dodge Durango all had midship-mounted gas tanks. Do you see that?
Yes, I do. Those were body-on-frame vehicles with different purposes.
Isn't the statement true that the 87 Dodge Dakota, 94 Dodge Ram, and 98 Dodge Durango all had midship-mounted gas tanks?
Yep, they were able to package the midship tank.
As to the Liberties, the letter says that the model year 2002 through 2007 Liberty had a fuel tank located aft of the rear axle and less than a foot forward of the aft face of the rear bumper. Doesn't it say that?
It does say that, and we responded to that in our response letter to NHTSA.
Well, that's a true statement, isn't it?
I don't know the exact numbers of it, but it's reasonably accurate.
Okay. And then as to the Liberties, the letter also says, quote, this tank is also more exposed to impacts from passenger cars because of the Liberty's comparatively high ground clearance and ride height. Do you see that?
And again, our response to them was that it was right in the predominant volume of height and offset.
The question was, do you see that?
I do see the sentence.
And the sentence that says, this tank is also more exposed to impacts from passenger cars because of the Liberty's comparatively high ground clearance and ride height is a true statement, isn't it?
54.
Honestly, it's no different than any other vehicle with these ride characteristics.
Is the statement true or is the statement false?
That's an answer.
I don't know if it's exposed more because it is protected with the rail structure.
We'll show you a copy of your deposition from earlier this year. On the front page here, you can see the very first page. It says, U.S. District Court, Eastern District of Illinois, right?
Yes.
And then in the middle of the first page, it says videotape deposition of Matthew Ledane, correct?
That's correct.
Do you recall being under oath during this deposition?
Yes.
Let me just make a note for the record that the White case did not take place in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Illinois. I think that must be a typo from the court reporter.
I think you were right.
Is that an exhibit number?
No. Turn, if you would, to page 68.
6-8?
6-8. That's deposition page 6-8. So you'll find it in the top right corner.
Okay.
And on page 68, tell me if I read this correctly, starting at line 10. Question, it goes on to say, quote, this tank is also more exposed to impacts from passenger cars because of the Liberty's comparatively high ground clearance and ride height. Is that a true statement? Answer, yes. It can be true, yes. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, you did.
I want to ask you now about another sentence from that letter, and this is back on page 2.
Page 2 of the previous.
Page 2 of the NHTSA recall request letter that's marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 40.
Okay.
And specifically, I want to ask you about the middle highlight there. Doesn't that say, quote, the vulnerability of tanks located behind solid rear axles and rear impacts became well known following a series of fiery collisions involving the Ford Pinto. Do you see that?
I see it.
That's a true statement, isn't it?
I don't think it's true. The term vulnerability of the tank located behind, I don't agree.
All right, pull out your deposition again, and this time please flip to page 42. We're looking again at your deposition from the Kayla White Jeep case,
Okay,
correct?
I see it.
Are we looking again at the same deposition from the Kayla White Jeep case?
Yes, we are.
This is from May of this year, right?
Correct.
Read with me, please. Page 42, beginning at line 16. Question. The next sentence says, quote, the vulnerability of tanks located behind solid rear axles in rear impacts became well known following a series of fiery crashes involving the Ford Pinto, end quote. Did I read that correctly? There's an objection. Answer is yes. There's another question to you. Do you know that to be a true statement? Answer, yes. Isn't that what it says?
It does.
I'll just note here for the record, there's additional testimony clarifying that testimony on page 43.
If you would like to bring that up in your direct of Mr. Ledane, you can do that. Do you agree, Mr. Ledane, that the Ford Pinto was defective?
I don't know all of the details of the Ford Pinto, but I do know that they had an actual puncturing of the tank with the suspension member. So it was actually a defect that they corrected. It wasn't the location of the tank that was the problem.
Is it your testimony that the tank location on the Ford Pinto was not the problem?
The location in itself was not the issue.
Do you agree that the Ford Pinto was dangerous?
I don't have a position on that.
Well, do you agree that the Ford Pinto put its drivers and their families at risk of fires following rear impact?
And, because of the bracket issue, perhaps, but not the location of the tank itself.
Isn't it true that even the Ford Pinto met the federal minimum standards, including number 301, standard number 301?
Get your form foundation.
My understanding is that it indeed had an issue where it was puncturing the tank even with the 30-mile-per-hour hit.
Isn't it true that even the Pinto met the federal minimum standards, including standard number 301?
Asked and answered. Form foundation.
At one time it met it, but there was issues with the bracket that made it not, that it would not have passed.
All right, just look at your deposition again, and we'll go now to page 42. This is, your deposition in the Kayla White case. Excuse me, not 42, page 311.
Okay.
And read with me starting on page 311 at line 23. And it says, question, oh, and by the way, the Pinto complied with that standard, didn't it? And there's an objection. And then your answer is the Pinto ultimately complied. Yes. Did I read that correctly?
I object that does not impeach the witness's testimony.
It ultimately complied, but it still had an issue at some events.
Do you agree still today that the Pinto ultimately complied with federal minimum standard 301?
It must have.
You said that it did in May, right?
Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to sell it.
We'll show you a picture that's been marked as Plans Exhibit number 85. This is I represent to you a picture that I found on the internet of a car in California, apparently. But anyway, do you recognize the vehicle shown in Plans Exhibit 85?
Foundation.
Yes.
It's the Pinto, right?
Correct.
Except here, we use the computer to color the gas tank red so it would be easier to see. But do you see the gas tank in Plans Exhibit 85?
I see what
Foundation.
that would be the gas tank that's colored red.
Do you agree that that gas tank appears to be vulnerable to rear impact?
Object to form.
I can't answer if it's vulnerable or not based on what other structures the Pinto I'm not familiar with.
Well, given what you know about the Pinto, don't you agree that Ford Motor Company had a responsibility, a moral responsibility, at least to warn its customers about the dangers of that gas tank?
Object to form argumentative.
No, I don't think there was cause for them to warn based on this photo.
So nothing in Plaintiff's Exhibit 85 convinces you that Ford should have warned consumers about the dangers associated with that gas tank?
Form argumentative, asked and answered.
No.
I'll show you now what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 83. And you recognize there on the left side of Plaintiff's Exhibit 83 that same picture of the Ford Pinto that we were just looking at a few seconds ago?
I do?
And then on the right, you recognize, don't you, a 2002 to 2007 Jeep Liberty.
Correct.
Now, in both cases, we've colored the gas tanks red so that they're easy to see. Do you agree that the gas tank location on the Ford Pinto and the Jeep Liberty are very similar?
Just a form.
In both cases, I can see the tank.
Do you agree that the gas tank location on the Ford Pinto and the Jeep Liberty, as shown in Plaintiff's Exhibit 83, is very similar?
Asked and answered.
As stated before, I can see both.
Right, I understand that you can see both, which is why I'm asking you the question about whether you agree that the tank location of both vehicles is very similar.
Asked and answered.
It appears similar.
I'm going to show you now what I've marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 84. And I'll represent to you that Plaintiff's Exhibit 84 shows sort of zoomed in pictures of the Pinto on the left and the Jeep Liberty on the right. Do you see the gas tanks in those pictures?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree that both of those gas tanks are very close to the extreme rear of the vehicle?
Just a form.
I can't tell the dimensions, but it is forward of the rear member.
What does forward of the rear member mean?
It's in proximity of the rear structure.
Does that mean close to the back?
It's, I guess, definition of close. I mean,
Well, okay. Isn't it true that the gas tank on the Ford Pinto was made of metal or steel?
I do not have that knowledge.
Okay, well, if you look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 84, do you see the flange at the back of the Pinto's gas tank?
I do.
Were they even making plastic gas tanks in the 1970s?
I'm not a fuel system expert, so I can't say if the plastic tanks were in use then or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, what was the gas tank on the Jeep Liberty made of?
It was a form of plastic. I don't know which exact material.
Were you aware, well, let me ask that question a different way. Mr. Shinobi testified that the idea of putting trailer hitches on the back of these rear tank Jeeps came from FCA's Crash Simulation and Crash Development Department. Do you agree with that?
Form and foundation.
My memory is that the idea came up as an enhancement in multiple meetings where that group was present. So it could have been, but my memory is not completely accurate on who.
Were FCA's executives also present at those meetings?
What executives?
Like you?
Like me. After the initial idea came up, yes.
And you've reviewed at least some crash tests, internal FCA crash tests of these Jeep Liberties, right?
Object to form and foundation.
I reviewed the department showed me side views of the crash before and after with trailer hitch, with and without trailer hitch.
We're talking about FCA crash tests, right?
Correct.
All right. Okay. Well, anyway, at no point before conducting this recall in which free trailer hitches were given out to people. Did FCA run this 50-mile-an-hour rear impact 301 test into the 2002-2007 Jeep Liberties, did it?
We did not. NHTSA did run tests to simulate real world at higher speed as part of the buy-off on the trailer hitch.
Well, did you look at NHTSA's the test report from NHTSA after those tests?
From originally, yes.
Would you agree that some of the results from that test were troubling?
Good form of foundation, argumentative.
Not that I recall.
Right. Well, I'm going to show you then what I've marked as Plans Exhibit number 30.
Excuse me.
And I'll represent to you that Plans Exhibit number 30 is an excerpt from those NHTSA tests that were conducted at the VRTC facility. Do you see the letters VRTC in the pictures there?
I do.
Now, if you're looking at the bottom picture there, the post-crash picture labeled VRTC 131212, is it your testimony that that is a good result?
I would say it's a positive result because the fuel tank isn't breached.
Well, the fuel tank is in green in that picture, right?
Correct.
And would you agree that the trailer hitch has gotten jammed into the gas tank?
Good form.
It's deformed into the gas tank, but it also took some of the load from hitting the tank directly.
Well, we can see the sort of undercarriage of the vehicle at the bottom of the picture, including the spare tire, right?
Yeah, yes, yep.
And isn't it true that the trailer hitch has jammed into the tank much further than the rest of the intrusion did?
Form of foundation, argumentative.
Yeah, NHTSA was simulating in an underride condition using a neon.
All right, well, let's just cut to the chase. If you were putting your family members, or your spouse in this case, into one of these Jeeps, would you be comforted by the bottom picture there in Plans Exhibit 30?
Good form of foundation.
It's hard to tell from the picture, but since the tank wasn't breached, I would be comfortable with it.
Isn't it true, Mr. Ledane, that as to the rear tank Jeeps addressed in NHTSA's recall request letter that's been marked as Plans Exhibit 40, in crashes above 50 miles an hour, gas tanks were failing, fires were occurring, and people were dying?
Form of foundation.
Are you referring to anything particular in the?
No, I'm not asking about the letter. I'm asking whether this is true, that in crashes above 50 miles an hour in these rear tank Jeeps, gas tanks were failing, fires were occurring, and people were dying.
Form of foundation.
With forces at high loads, with severe impacts, with the kinetic energy high, yes, it's true.
And didn't FCA know that in crashes above 50 miles an hour, gas tanks were failing, fires were occurring, and people were dying by at least 2012?
See objections.
We knew of the conditions. We also knew of the extreme forces that were involved that frankly, and our response indicated that it's very much in the pack with other vehicles with tank locations aft and even side.
Object is non-responsive. Isn't it true that by 2012, FCA knew that in crashes above 50 miles an hour, gas tanks were failing, fires were occurring, and people were dying?
That's perfectly responsive. It's asked and answered.
Isn't that true?
Well, we knew of it, but it was not out of, I'll call it, the competitive set, and even NHTSA ended up agreeing with us on our position.
Do you agree that rear-end collisions at all kinds of speeds happen every day in this country.
As do all impacts.
Do you agree with
Rear,
that?
side, front, offset, left rear, right rear.
The question was, do you agree that rear-end collisions at all kinds of speeds happen every day in this country?
Asked and answered.
As in every impact event, yes.
Do you agree that when someone gets rear-ended, they typically have very little control over how fast the vehicle that strikes them is going?
That seems obvious, yes.
Do you think it is okay for FCA to allow gas tanks to fail, fires to occur, and people to die in crashes above 50 miles an hour that occur into the rear of one of these rear tank Jeeps?
Form of foundation.
It's unfortunate that any of these things happen in any manufacturer with any impact, front, rear, side, where things are, where there ends up being a death. There's 40 per day nationwide.
40 what per day?
40 deaths due to fire per day. It's an unfortunate thing, but you cannot handle all of the loads when you're talking about closing speeds that are in the realm of what we're talking about, more than 2 times, 5 times the NHTSA 50 mile per hour test.
Isn't it true that FCA knew this trailer hitch would not help people who were being subjected, who were getting hit in the rear in high-speed collisions?
We specifically had the agreement for lower speed impact events, and we specifically said it would not mitigate high energy impact events.
The question was, isn't it true that FCA knew the trailer hitch would not help people who got rear-ended at high speeds?
Director Form Foundation.
Well, we didn't claim that it would, but subsequent tests, even NHTSA's test, showed that there was a benefit at higher speeds.
Is it your testimony that FCA thought the trailer hitch would help in high-speed collisions?
We only claimed that it would help in low speed.
I'm trying to get an answer to the question. The question is, isn't it true that FCA knew the trailer hitch would not help in high-speed rear-end collisions?
It's just, you can't just keep asking the same question over again, Counsel. He's answered the question.
No, he hadn't.
Yeah, he has.
We didn't want to claim that it would help, but the structure by itself should be an assistant, but we wouldn't make that a record. The claim was, the negotiated claim with NHTSA was lower speed events.
Object is non-responsive. I'm not asking you what you claimed. I'm asking you what FCA knew. Isn't it true that FCA knew the trailer hitch would not protect people in high-speed rear impacts?
At high energy impact events, it was not claimed to be beneficial.
Again, I'm not asking you about the claim. I'm asking you about what FCA knew. Isn't it true that FCA knew the trailer hitch would not help people who got rear-ended at high speeds?
Asked and answered.
Honestly, I don't know how better to answer it. I can't tell you. I mean, we knew that it would be some beneficial, but we didn't want to make that claim.
Isn't it true that with a gas tank in this rear location, FCA did not think that anything it put on the Jeeps would help people who happen to be rear-ended at higher speeds?
Director Form Foundation.
In many of the events that were under review, it would not have benefited. The forces were too high.
And FCA knew that. At the time of the trailer hitch recall, isn't it true that FCA knew the trailer hitch would not help people who were rear-ended at high speeds?
That's been asked and answered 3 times.
What's the answer?
We never said it would help. It's the same answer.
It is the same answer, but it's not an answer to the question. The question isn't what FCA claimed.
Well,
It's what FCA
he's already
knew.
testified twice, Counsel, that they believed it would provide a benefit.
I ain't asking you.
Well,
Mr. Ledane,
he's answered it twice,
Mr.
and now you're
Ledane.
harassing him, and so I'm going to make it clear to you that he has answered the question, so you will stop harassing him.
Mr. Ledane, turn to page 196 of your deposition in the Kayla White case.
I see it. I'm on page 196.
All right, please read along with me starting at line 16. Question, and in fact, this letter specifically states the trailer hitch cannot mitigate the risk of a high-energy collision like the collision in this case. Is that correct? There's an objection, and the answer is yes, it does.
And
I'll
do you see that?
I'll object that this is not proper impeachment.
Do you see that?
I do see it, and I was responding to what the letter specifically states, which is that is true, that the owner letter did state that. And the fact that communication with NHTSA said the same thing.
Turn, please, to page 324 of your deposition from the Kayla White Jeep Fire case.
You said 324?
324.
Okay, I am there.
And read along with me, please, beginning at line 1. Doesn't it say, quote, the trailer hitch cannot and will not mitigate the risk of the high-energy rear collisions you identified in your recall request letter, end quote. That's one of the conclusions you signed your name to. True?
Improper impeachment.
And your answer was correct. Did I read that correctly?
Improper
But you phrased your question differently. This says mitigate the risk. I was saying that there could be some benefit to it, but we didn't claim it.
The question was whether I read your prior testimony correctly. Did I?
Yes, you
Same
did.
objection.
You read it correctly.
Now, did the people who drove these rear tank Jeeps or whose families rode in these rear tank Jeeps have a right to know that the trailer hitch would not protect them even in high-speed collisions?
Objective form. Foundation.
Our communication to them through the owner letter stated that it would benefit in certain events.
Didn't that letter say low-speed collisions?
I can't remember if it said low or not. Do we have it?
No,
Do you have
we
a
don't,
copy?
but it does. Would you be surprised to learn that that letter referred to, quote, low-speed, end quote, collisions?
I'm recalling that it said either low to moderate or low. That's one of the question. I couldn't remember if it said moderate or not.
All right, so the question is, did the people who drove these rear tank Jeeps or whose families rode in these rear tank Jeeps have a right to know that the trailer hitch would not protect them in high-speed collisions?
Form and foundation. Asked and answered.
I think we were addressing what was the low to moderate speed, and that's what the trailer hitch was addressing. And that's what the agreement was, and that's what was validated with NHTSA.
I'm not asking you about any agreement with NHTSA or with anyone else. I'm asking you about a right to know. Here's the question again, which has been asked but not yet answered. Did the people who drove these rear tank Jeeps or whose families rode in these rear tank Jeeps have a right to know that the trailer hitch would not protect them in high-speed rear impact collisions?
Objective form. Argumentative. Asked and answered. Foundation.
I don't think so, in the fact that there's limits to what a vehicle can do, and those aren't described in most cases, if at all, for anybody.
Is your testimony that the families did not have a right to know that the trailer hitch would not protect them in high-speed rear impact collisions?
Asked and answered. Same objections. He's answered the question.
It's not usual and customary to show what the limit of a vehicle is in all cases. Think of what that means going around a vehicle and trying to describe what the limit of everything on the vehicle can or can't do. And a customer to be able to process that, you wouldn't describe it.
FCA conducted a recall of these Jeeps, right?
Correct.
Because of
Ford
fire
low.
problems, right?
In low to moderate, where we wanted to improve the performance for that attribute.
Did customers have a right to know that they were unprotected in high-speed rear impacts?
That's it's now 5 times, same question. I'm going to have to insist that you move on. You've now asked it. He's answered it multiple times.
No, he hasn't answered. What's the answer?
No, he's answered.
I think I've answered it.
Well, what is the answer? Make it short. I mean,
He's
do
already
they have
answered the question.
Do they have a right to know or do they not?
This is harassing. He's answered the question numerous times.
I don't think they do in this case.
Okay. Pull out your deposition from the Kayla White case, please. And turn with me to page 118.
Okay, I'm there.
And this is going to be a a little longer passage, but it starts on page 118 at line 21. Question: why weren't the customers warned that the remedy they were getting was inadequate and would not protect them in foreseeable impacts where fires and deaths were actually occurring? There's an objection. Answer: again, our purpose of the remedy was for the lower speed events. So to say the higher speed doesn't address, didn't think it was warranted, and we also, again, these were all reviewed and approved by NHTSA as well. There's an objection, and then you say they approved the letter, especially in this case, and then there's question. But again, don't you think the customers have a right to know that they are getting at best half a loaf? There's another objection, and your answer was perhaps yes.
Improper impeachment.
Did I read that correctly?
You read it correctly.
Did you know, Mr. Ledane, that Fiat Chrysler's own hired expert, in this case, has agreed that if a jury concludes that the Jeeps with rear gas tanks are dangerous, those Jeeps must be repurchased by FCA and destroyed because there is no way to guard against the danger?
Form and foundation.
Can you repeat the source of that? I'm sorry.
It's one of FCA's hired experts. In this case, this fellow's name was Mark Fleming. Did you know about that?
Form and foundation.
Okay.
No. Can you read it again, though, for me, please?
I'll do you one better than that. I'll show it to you. So I'm handing you now what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 64. And here on the first page, and sort of the top left of the first page of Plaintiff's Exhibit 64, it says the deposition of Mark Fleming. Do you see that?
You're at the beginning?
Yep, on
Yeah.
page 1.
Okay.
It just says deposition of Mark Fleming, right?
Yes.
Okay. And let me show you what it is I want to ask you about. And specifically, I'm looking at page 8, and the text is highlighted. It says, question, do you agree that if a jury were to conclude that the Jeeps with the rear gas tanks are dangerous, then they must be repurchased by FCA and destroyed because there's no way to guard against the danger? There's an objection, and Mr. Fleming answers yes. Subject to that, like I've said, I've gone through, I performed my analysis on the vehicle, and I find that it's safe. And I'm sticking with my conclusions on that. Did I read it right?
I'll just object to this is improper impeachment, lacks foundation, argumentative.
The question was, did I read it right?
Same objections.
I did. You read it correctly.
All right. Do you think that if a jury were to conclude that these Jeeps with rear gas tanks are dangerous, then they must be repurchased by FCA and destroyed because there's no way to guard against the danger?
Same objections.
No, I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay. Look on in the same exhibit, that is Plaintiff's Exhibit 64. Look on page...
Is that what it says? Okay, 64.
Same exhibit.
Yep.
And in deposition page 9, where you'll see some highlighted text starting at line 18. Are you there?
I am there.
Okay. And here, FCA's hired experts answers as follows. Question to you, is it okay to ignore the verdict reached by American citizens? And there's an objection. And then the answer is, I don't ignore the verdict, no. Isn't that what it says?
Just object to the form and foundation and proper impeachment.
You've read it correctly.
Do you agree with that?
Same objections.
If they find it, and this is all hypothetical, if they did, then we would argue that it met or exceeded the standards, that there are 27 million vehicles with aft axle tanks in use, and how is this any different than those? And if we had to, we would try to perhaps come up with something else, but I don't know about just saying to buy back the vehicles. To ignore their comment, no, but to respond to it differently than buyback, yes.
Well, the question was whether you agree with this hired expert's statement that it is not okay to ignore verdicts reached by American citizens regarding these Jeeps.
I don't think it's...
Hold on, let me just object to the foundation. That's not what he testified.
What's your response?
You can't ignore, but then they process to take the next steps on what to do with that verdict.
Well, anyway, the point is the verdict is important, isn't it?
Of course
Object
it
to
is.
form
I
argumentative.
mean, if a jury hears weeks of evidence and then decides that the vehicle was defective, that should alert FCA to a real problem, shouldn't it?
Form of foundation, argumentative.
It certainly would have to be responded to, yes.
I mean, it would be a clue that there might be a real problem here,
Form
right?
of foundation.
If there was new information that was different than what we've already responded to with NHTSA in this case, and the exhaustive data that we've provided on where our vehicles stand, then yes.
Did you know that a jury has already told FCA that the Jeeps with rear gas tanks are dangerous?
Hold on. I just want to note for the record that you're mischaracterizing the record in that case, characterizing it as Jeeps.
Don't give me this long speaking objection. If you want to make an objection, do it.
Well, you're lying.
But be
So
concise.
you're lying, so I'm going to correct you.
No, that's absurd. That's absurd. We'll go through the documents in a second. Here's the question. Did you know that a jury has already told FCA that these Jeeps with rear gas tanks are dangerous?
Form of foundation mischaracterizes the record.
I know of some of the outcomes, yes, that said that they found, I won't say defective, but there were issues.
There's only been one trial in these Jeep fire cases. Everything else was settled, right?
Form of foundation.
I don't have all the history of what's been settled, what hasn't been, what has gone to trial.
Well, you know of only one trial involving these rear tank Jeeps, right?
I know of one. I don't know if that was the only one. It's the only one I know of.
Okay. That was the case where 4-year-old Remington Walden burned to death in a 1999 Grand Cherokee that had a rear gas tank, right?
Form of foundation.
I believe so, yes.
I'm going to show you now what's been marked as plaintiff's exhibit number 60. Do you see at the top there, it says, in the Superior Court of Decatur County, State of Georgia?
I do.
I'll represent to you that this is the verdict form filled out by the jury in that case. Do you see the highlighted language there in the middle of the page?
Yes,
Form
I
of
do.
foundation.
I see it.
Doesn't that say, do you find that Chrysler Group acted with a reckless or wanton disregard for human life in the design or sale of the 1999 Grand Cherokee, and that such conduct was a proximate cause of damages for which the plaintiffs may recover? Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
How did the jury answer that question?
I should object to this whole line. Can I get, at least on, so I don't have to keep interrupting every question, can I get a running objection for all of your questions regarding the Walden case?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I see they responded yes.
And the next one, the next question to the jury that's highlighted there says, do you find that Chrysler Group had a duty to warn and failed to warn of a hazard associated with the use of the 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and that such failure to warn was a proximate cause of damages for which the plaintiffs may recover? You see that?
I see that.
How did the jury answer that question?
They also responded yes.
Don't you think it's important for FCA to think long and hard about these rear tank Jeeps following this jury's findings?
Form of foundation.
Well, I don't know. I was already out of this position by this time, but I honestly, I don't. I mean, with the verdict, I know it was yes and yes. The response to it is still that we believe the vehicles are not defective.
The question was, don't you think it would be important for FCA to think long and hard about these rear tank Jeeps following this jury's findings?
Same objections.
Yeah, I can't answer what FCA should think about this now.
Do you think it's important?
I think all data is important.
Well, turn to the second page in Plans Exhibit 60. Do you see the date there at the very bottom?
I do.
That was April the 2nd, 2015, right?
Correct.
That would be about 2.5 years before Deanna Gilreath burned to death, right?
I'm sure you had the dates correct.
We talked a little bit about the Pinto earlier, and I'd like to return to that subject. Do you remember why Ford never fixed the Pintos or bought them back?
This is totally beyond the scope of this witness's knowledge. He's never worked for Ford Motor Company. It's totally inappropriate. It's harassing. I don't know why you're wasting our time with this.
If you would like to make an objection, do so succinctly and professionally, please, and
I have
cease
done
these
so.
speaking objections.
Well, I'm making clear objections for the record.
You're making speeches.
Can you?
Yes, I can run the question back to you. We talked a little about the Pinto earlier. Do you remember why Ford never fixed the Pintos or bought them back?
Same objection. Form foundation.
No, I don't have that knowledge.
Okay. Well, you're familiar with the idea of a cost-benefit analysis, aren't you?
I've certainly heard that term before.
You know what it is?
I know there's a cost, and then what's the benefit? It's a financial summary.
We'll talk about that in a minute. But I'll ask you this. Do you think that it would have been ethical to allow Deanna Gilreath to burn because it would have cost too much to prevent her death?
Form of foundation.
I don't think that's applicable to our case. We've never made such a choice that I'm aware of.
Well, if FCA could have done something that would have prevented Deanna Gilreath from burning to death, don't you think that FCA should have done that?
Form of foundation.
In our opinion, we did the actions to improve the vehicle. And there's certain impact events that no matter what you do to the vehicle, the energy levels are too high. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, there's 40 such per day.
Isn't it true that the only real way to keep people safe in the situation of these rear tank Jeeps is for FCA to buy them back and crush them?
Form of foundation.
I don't agree because, again, the vehicle, to us, it is a safe vehicle. It met, at the time, the standard. We've run a test with NHTSA at higher speeds. It passed. And then we did a subsequent test recently, as what was described earlier, at the 50 mile per hour, and it was beneficial. So, again, there's nothing defective about the vehicle. It's unfortunate that these happen, but again, there's 40 per day that happen in the U.S. that are all brands, and we aren't abnormal. We are not an outlier. It's unfortunate. I understand. No question.
I'll object as non-responsive and ask you this. Isn't it true, since FCA did not even claim that these trailer hitches could help in high-speed rear impacts, that the only way to keep people safe was to buy these Jeeps back and crush them?
Asked and answered. Same objections as well.
Again, I do not agree that that's the vehicle is a safe vehicle, and we made it even safer with the trailer hitch.
Isn't it true that FCA does not even claim that these trailer hitches could keep people safe in high-speed rear impacts?
Asked and answered.
As discussed earlier, the claim was for lower speed events.
So FCA does not even claim that the hitch can keep people safe in high-speed collisions.
Object to form.
True?
At high speed with high kinetic energy, there's not an immediate benefit.
Object is non-responsive. Isn't it true that FCA does not even claim that the trailer hitch can help keep people safe in high-speed rear impact collisions?
That is true. We don't claim that.
It was much cheaper for FCA to give out free trailer hitches as a part of this recall than to buy all these Jeeps back, wasn't it?
Well, obviously that's true, but it was never discussed. We never, again, we don't think the vehicle is unsafe. We think it's safe. It's not defective. It's not out of the normal, so we didn't consider buying back such vehicles.
Did you know that FCA witness David Bernier has conceded that the number of Jeep Liberties on the road in 2015, multiplied by their approximate value according to Kelley Blue Book, was about $3.7 billion?
Object to form.
I'm assuming that was based on math. That's what the current cost of the vehicle or sales price of the vehicle will be times the quantity. But again, that was never a number that we even considered. It was never discussed.
Well, do you have any reason to disagree with Mr. Bernier's testimony that the number of Jeep Liberties on the road in 2015 times the approximate value of those Jeeps is about $3.7 billion?
I have no reason to argue that it's a significant number. What goes into that number for the valuation, the quantity is correct. I'm sure it's a large number.
Well, you don't have a different number, do you?
I don't have any number.
All right. Isn't it true that the cost of this trailer hitch recall to FCA was estimated to be about $151 million?
I do recall that in that ballpark, the number correct.
Isn't it true that by doing this trailer hitch recall, instead of buying back all these Jeep Liberties, even just the Liberties, FCA saved about $3.5 billion?
Form a foundation.
Again, you're comparing something that was never even considered. You can always come up with math to have something less than something else. We never considered buying back the vehicles. Again, we do not think there's an issue with the performance of the vehicle. We never agreed that it was a defect, so it wasn't considered to buy them back and take them off the road. We were looking for incremental improvements, which we applied in a negotiated remedy with NHTSA.
Well, Mr. Ledeen, I'll object as non-responsive. The question is, if it is true that buying back the Jeep Liberties would have cost about $3.7 billion, and the trailer hitch recall cost about $151 million, then by doing the recall, instead of buying them back, FCA saved about $3.5 billion.
Same objections, and it's been asked and answered completely.
I'm not going to answer that because you're putting it up a thing that there was a choice involved between those and it was overtly to save money. That is not true.
Is it true that $3.7 billion minus $151 million
Come on.
is about $3.55 billion?
The math would say yes.
That's all the questions I have.
She done for the day?
Well, y'all may have questions.
I don't have any.
I'm going to take a break and come back.
The time is 11:18 and we are off the record. The time is 11:26 and we are back on the record.
Mr. Ledeen. At the very end of questioning council had you subtract 150 million or 151 million from 3.7 billion. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Was that ever math that was conducted in connection with this recall in any way by FCA?
Not at all.
You were asked about a statement made by Mr. Marchionne, a statement that the KJ Liberty was absolutely safe. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Is there any vehicle, to your knowledge, that is impenetrable?
Every vehicle has limits that you go beyond the physics of what the vehicle can take, whether that's rear impact, as in this case, unfortunate, side impacts are a high rate, offset frontals. Every vehicle has a limit where the forces you overcome and bad things happen.
So when you use the term absolutely safe, and I think you agreed with Mr. Marchionne that the vehicle is absolutely safe, do you intend to suggest that it's impenetrable?
No.
Objection leading and testifying for the witness.
Under no circumstances is something beyond, impenetrable.
Well, let me ask you this. When you agreed that the KJ Liberty is absolutely safe, what do you mean by absolutely safe?
My idea in the company, as far as absolutely safe, would be that it's safe. It's not an outlier. It balances all the objectives of what a vehicle needs to do. It complies, and it's not unsafe. It's safe application for a vehicle to be on the road.
You were shown a letter sent from the NHTSA to your attention dated June 3rd, 2013, Exhibit 40. Do you recall that? Plaintiff's 40?
Is it 4-0? I recall, I'm just trying to find it.
It is.
Okay, I have it.
And you recall being asked various questions about statements made by NHTSA in this letter?
Yes, I do.
Now, did you, on behalf of FCA, respond to this letter?
Yes, we did.
And was that in a series of two letters dated June 18th, 2013?
Correct.
All right, I'm going to hand you what I've marked as Defendant's Exhibit 1. Can you look through that and confirm that it's a correct copy of the two June 18th, 2013 letters responding to NHTSA's June 3rd, 2013 letter?
Yes, it has both letters contained.
So all of the statements made by NHTSA in its Plaintiff's Exhibit 40 in its June 3rd, 2013 letter, did FCA rebut all of the statements made in that letter in its June 18th, 2013 letters?
We responded to their letter in full.
Now, did you have I know that this letter is under your hand signed, correct?
Correct.
Did you have a hand in drafting this letter?
As any big company, we have a team that drafts, put the facts together, review it together. We add words, change words, and ultimately I sign it.
Okay. And do you recall drafting from scratch any portion of the letter?
Pieces of it, not specifically. Then the summary. I wanted to make the summary my own words, so I took what was in there and made the summary. Okay. But I had parts in it. I can't specifically outline what sentences I did or didn't do, but it was a full team effort you'd expect with such a document of such importance.
So I want to direct your attention just to the first paragraph of the letter, on the first page of Exhibit 1. Do you see that?
The first paragraph?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Can you read for me the sentence that begins with, the second sentence in that paragraph, beginning with Chrysler Group has carefully considered?
Yes. Chrysler Group has carefully considered the information you've provided in your letter, as well as other available information that has been collected over the past 3.5 years since this investigation has been pending, and has concluded that the subject vehicles at issue are safe and do not contain a defect related to motor vehicle safety in either design or performance.
Okay. And is that a conclusion that you and FCA endorsed at the time that you sent this letter?
Absolutely, yes.
In the second paragraph, it mentions a separate letter filed with your office today. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And is that letter the last 4 pages of Exhibit 1?
Yes, it is.
Can you go ahead and read that first paragraph of paragraph 1?
Of the second letter?
Of the first letter.
Of the first letter.
Second paragraph,
Okay.
first sentence.
Understand. By separate letter filed with your office today, Chrysler Group is committed to undertaking a safety campaign to offer owners of certain Jeep Grand Cherokees and Liberty vehicles with a trailer hitch in order to provide incremental improvement in crash energy management in low to moderate speed rear collisions. The trailer hitch cannot and will not mitigate the risk of high energy rear collisions identified in your recall request letter. The purpose of this letter is to explain why Chrysler Group is declining your request that Chrysler Group determine a safety-related defect in these vehicles and conduct a safety recall to address high-energy rear collisions.
And did NHTSA agree to Chrysler's proposal to install a trailer hitch on certain Jeep Grand Cherokee vehicles and the KJ Liberty vehicles?
There was negotiated with them, and after their completion of their testing that they did themselves to validate it, they accepted it as a remedy.
And can you describe generally what the testing NHTSA conducted consisted of?
Well, going from memory, they had vehicles with and without trailer hitches, and a neon that struck the vehicle at 40 to 42 miles per hour above the 30 mile per hour that the barrier test is, and then Ford F-150 pickup truck as well.
At similar speeds?
At similar speeds.
So while the company doesn't claim or represent that the trailer hitch can provide a safety benefit at those higher speeds, did in fact the hitch provide such a benefit?
Because they ran the test at a higher rate of speed and it didn't breach the tank, yes, it added a benefit.
And in those crash tests, did the trailer hitch help to manage the crash energy?
It did, because it performed better than the vehicles without the trailer hitch.
Okay, so I want to direct your attention back to page 1 of Exhibit 1. Do you see that there's a sentence that says, "In this response, Chrysler Group will show," and then there's a series of bullet points that carry over onto page 2?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so the first bullet point states, "Most of the crashes identified by NHTSA's Office of Defects Investigation, ODI and paren, as relevant to its investigation were extremely severe crashes involving energy levels far in excess of any reasonable expectation for fuel tank performance." Do you see that?
I do.
And it goes on to say, indeed, the rear impacts in most of these crashes were so severe that any of the peer vehicles would also have experienced fuel leakage. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
And then the third sentence says, no vehicle or fuel system design can completely erase the possibility of fuel leakage in severe collisions. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right, now that entire first bullet point, is there more information presented in the letter that touches on the subject matter covered in the first bullet point?
In the document, we did respond with data that shows our performance of the vehicles and how it compared to both the pure set that NHTSA had identified and then a wider set of vehicles. For instance, on page 12, where we have many vehicles with multiple tank locations and how its performance is. And we included this data as part of our response.
Can you identify the page numbers where those materials are presented in this letter?
Let me see. So, for instance, on the high energy, if you look on, we'll go with the on page 4, the ZJ energy impact. There's a bar chart that shows the different cases or vehicles that were being discussed. And on the left side, it has what the energy foot-pounds were for a 301 test and what it is for a 50 mile per hour test versus 30. Then each line item is the vehicle with crash data from the field.
And then that same type of chart is shown on page 6 with respect to the KJ Liberty, isn't that correct?
5 is the WJ and page 6 is the KJ.
Okay. And can you identify additional page numbers that cover the subject matter addressed in the first bullet point?
Let me make sure it's not stepping out here. The sentence that said, indeed, the rear impacts of most of these crashes are so severe that any of the peer vehicles would have had experienced fuel leakage. Those peer vehicles are outlined from a rate on page 10. Those are the peer vehicles that NHTSA picked as compared for these cases. So page 10 shows where the Grand Cherokee, the Liberty, the WJ Grand Cherokee perform relative to the data set that NHTSA used.
And is the Liberty in any way an outlier among its peer vehicles in terms of this performance?
Not in this case, no.
Okay.
And then we further go. We'll object to all these questions about statistics as requiring expertise that Mr. Ledane does not have, so calling for speculation.
Well, do you need an understanding of statistics to understand the chart shown on page 10 of your letter?
Yeah. While it's true, I will never claim to be a statistical expert, but the data is just showing the data of where we are relative to the peer vehicles and the competitive set.
We don't have to have an argument about it. Will you give me a standing objection to all statistical testimony on the basis that Mr. Ledane is not qualified to provide it?
I'll give you a standing objection. Disagree, but go ahead. All right, so are there
also on grounds of hearsay?
Is there additional information relative to peer vehicle performance presented in this letter after the chart that you mentioned on page 10?
Well, the same type of data format is also included on page 13.
Mr. Swanson, may my standing objection include hearsay as well?
I don't believe you're required to object to hearsay in a deposition, counsel, so no.
Well, then I'll keep objecting to hearsay
Well,
every
you're
time.
not required to do so.
Okay, well, give me a standing objection and I won't.
Fine.
Just for the record, though, I believe this is a trial deposition, so you do have to object to hearsay.
Why is it a trial deposition?
That's how it was noticed to me.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I said that in the read-on.
Well, I mean, I'll give you running objections. You know, I presume we can take up objections in the normal course with the court and deal with it at that time.
We talked about that in a hearing. And I'm not going to pretend to recite for you what the court said because
I'm aware of what the court said.
Okay, good.
All right. So you discussed a chart on page 10. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then is there additional information on pages 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 that also support the first bullet point that I read from your letter?
As comparing all the pages subsequent end up talking about how we compare to the other population of vehicles.
All right. So based upon that information, as you in your letter presented to NHTSA, you formed a bottom line conclusion expressed in the first bullet point that in the first bullet point, is that correct?
Correct.
And can you go ahead and read the second bullet point as well?
The second bullet point is the vast majority of the relevant crashes involving the subject vehicles occurred at energy levels far in excess of those prescribed by the current version of MVSS 301, and a version that is more than twice as severe as the standard that was applicable to the subject vehicles. And those are basically the same charts on page 4, page 5, and page 6.
Okay. The next bullet point says the performance of the subject vehicles cannot be distinguished from the ODI selected peer vehicle set in any statistically meaningful way. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And is that conclusion also supported by the information that you identified on pages 10 through 19?
Yes, it does.
So in other words, the performance of the KJ Liberty is comparable to the performance of the peer vehicles selected by NHTSA as peer vehicles. Is that right?
Objection leading.
The Liberty performance is basically in the middle of the peer set that NHTSA picked.
The next bullet point states fire-related fatalities and injuries have occurred in all of the ODI selected peer vehicles, often at rates exceeding those exhibited by the subject vehicles. Under applicable law, these data mean that ODI cannot establish that the subject vehicle contained a performance defect that these other vehicles do not possess. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And is that conclusion supported by the data set forth in your letter, pages 10 through 19, that you've been discussing?
Objection leading.
The response to that bullet point are answered in those same pages.
Okay. Now, counsel asked you questions earlier discussing the sort of dimensions of the fuel tank for the KJ Liberty with respect to its ground clearance and its distance from the rear bumper. Do you see that?
Yes.
Or do you remember that?
I remember that, yeah.
And is that an issue that was addressed in your letter to the NHTSA, Exhibit 1?
Yes, we responded with some data that we included in the results page, and that's on page 21.
Okay. And based upon that data, did the company form any conclusions with respect to how the dimensions of a Jeep Liberty would compare to other vehicles?
We summarized it on page 21 in the center of the page, bullet point, The average height of the fuel tank above the ground of all pure SUVs measured by Chrysler Group is approximately 34.7 centimeters. The average measurement height of the fuel tank above the ground of the Grand Cherokee is 33.5, the Grand Cherokee WJ is 26.5, and the Liberty is 31.9. Virtually indistinguishable from the other vehicles.
So this bullet point states that the measured height of the fuel tank above the ground for the KJ Liberty is virtually indistinguishable from the other vehicles?
That was our
Join.
that was our conclusion in response to NHTSA.
And what is the next conclusion that you expressed in your letter?
We also talked about the offset dimension at the top of the page of 21. Chrysler Group's measurement data on aft axle tanks revealed that only 3 of the 25 pure SUV Chrysler Group studied had a rear-mounted tank to aft bumper measurement of more than 12 inches. In other words, 22 of 25 pure SUVs Chrysler Group measured had a tank of less than 1 foot forward of the aft face of the rear bumper.
Is there did your letter respond to the suggestion made in the June 3rd, 2013 letter, which was discussed earlier, that the tank-to-ground clearance of the KJ makes it more vulnerable in rear impacts than passenger cars?
We flagged out the dimensions of the competitive set. That's my memory.
What about after those bullet points that you pointed to?
On page 21, by the statement that a higher tank-to-ground clearance makes any SUV more vulnerable in rear impact than passenger cars, Office of Defects Investigation, ODI, is implying that passenger car tank-to-ground clearance are the design benchmark for ensuring fuel tank protection in the rear impact. This is not supported by the data.
So, any suggestion that there is something different about the ground clearance for the KJ Liberty by council, do you agree with that?
I'm sorry.
Any suggestion that there's something unique about the ground clearance or take position for the Jeep Liberty? Do the data support that?
The data we have and we provided the NHTSA was that it was indistinguishable.
There's a bullet point also on page 2, which states the current FMVSS 301 did not require full compliance until September 2008. Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And by the current FMVSS 301, what does that refer to?
When you say the current, well, the current FMVSS did not require, that's the 50 mile per hour deformable barrier test.
Okay. So that crash standard was not required for the 2002 to 2007 KJ Liberty. Is that correct?
Objection leading.
Well, let me rephrase. Was the current 50 mile per hour FMVSS 301 test required for the 2002 to 2007 KJ Liberty?
The KJ met the specification for the MVS 301 at 30 miles per hour with a rigid barrier, and the 50 mile per hour deformable came in effect September 2008. As we say here, that's approximately 15 months earlier than that we pulled the vehicle out of production 15 months before September 2008.
Okay, so at no point of time was the 50 mile per hour test required for the KJ, is that correct?
Objection leading.
It did not. It wasn't required for that, for this heritage vehicle.
Let me rephrase. Was the 50 mile an hour deformable barrier offset crash test required for the 2002 to 2007
Same objection.
Jeep Liberty?
You've just attempted to instruct Mr. Ledane what to say.
It was not required to meet the 50-mile-per-hour test.
Yeah, and that's exactly what
And
it
that's
says.
what we
states
say,
in the-
that's what the bullet point says.
Okay. And you're aware that as part of this case, FCA has run a 50-mile-an-hour FMVSS 301 deformable barrier offset crash test. Is that correct?
I'm aware of
Objection
that.
leading.
I'm aware of that now.
And are you aware of whether the vehicle passed or did not pass that crash test?
The report was that it passed.
And then finally, the last bullet point states what?
The final bullet point was the subject vehicles are safe and do not contain a safety-related defect.
Now, after you sent this letter on June 18, 2013 to the NHTSA, did the NHTSA ever write back and dispute any of the conclusions in this letter?
They did not.
There's been a lot of talk about the Ford Pinto. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, I do.
Did you have any involvement in the Ford Pinto?
I did not.
Do you have any basis to believe that the Ford Pinto is in any way relevant in this case?
No more than any other rear tank vehicle, so no.
Okay. And there was some discussion about the Ford Pinto in NHTSA's June 3rd, 2013 letter. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then did the company, through your letter, respond to that?
We did a response. Let me find it. Bear with me for 1 second. Yeah, on page 23, we responded to the Ford Pinto. In the center of the page, where the highlighted the bold print is, it says Ford Pinto. The recall request letter states the vulnerability of tanks located behind solid rear axles and rear impacts became well known following a series of fiery crashes involving the Ford Pinto. This statement is misleading since most passenger vehicles produced during the 70s had fuel tanks in this location. Unlike the subject vehicles, that would be the Jeeps, the model year 1971 through 76 Ford Pintos were vulnerable to rear impacts because of the design of the fuel system, not because of the fuel tank location.
Now, when your letter states because of the design of the fuel system, what specifically was the issue for the Ford Pinto that was the design of the fuel system versus its fuel tank location?
The conclusion was the third paragraph down from that bold Ford Pinto comment. In discussing these crash tests, ODI noted a history of consistent results, including the fact that at speeds as low as 21.5 miles per hour with the fixed barrier, the fuel tank was punctured by contact with the differential housing and or its bolts, or with some other underbody structure. So the issue was the Pinto was specific hardware that was implicated in the puncturing of the tanks at low to moderate speeds. It wasn't the mere fact of the location of the tank. Indeed, the Ford Pinto continued to be produced with an aft axle fuel tank until it went out of production after the 1980 model year, with no suggestion by ODI that the latter non-recalled vehicles contained a safety defect.
Is it possible to design its fuel system, any vehicle, to withstand a 45 mile an hour impact from a 12,000 plus pound truck?
I'm not a crash expert, but I don't know of any.
No further questions.
Object to that last one. It's calling for speculation. Give me just a second. We don't need to go. We can stay on the record. Mr. Ledane, you just answered a long series of questions and read extensively from FCA's letter to NHTSA. It's 27 pages long, dated June 18, 2013. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
That letter was basically, I guess at the time it was Chrysler Group arguing that it shouldn't have to recall these vehicles, right?
It was our position that we shouldn't have to recall, and we were outlining the reasons why we had that position.
Yeah, in fact, this letter claims that the subject vehicles at issue, that means rear tank Jeeps, are safe and do not contain a defect related to motor vehicle safety. Isn't that what the letter contends or argues?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Now, do automakers normally conduct recalls of vehicles that are safe and do not contain safety defects?
Calls for speculation.
I don't. We have recalls with customer satisfaction improvements. So I don't know of all of them, so I can't answer that.
This letter from that you read extensively from when FCA's lawyer was asking you questions came, let's see here, 8 days after a really important event, didn't it?
Objective Farm Foundation.
I'm sorry, I don't know the date.
Well, the date of the letter is June 18. What important event happened on June 10, 2013?
I don't know, sir.
Isn't that the day that Sergio Marchionne had a private meeting with U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood and NHTSA Administrator David Strickland?
Yeah, I didn't remember the date, but they did meet.
Those are both politically appointed government officials, right?
Yes, they are.
Now, when Marchionne had that meeting, it was just Marchionne and those two guys, right?
That's my understanding.
Marchionne flew across the Atlantic and they met at Chicago O'Hare Airport, right?
That's my understanding.
There was nobody from ODI, the Office of Defects Investigation, at that meeting, was there?
My understanding was they were being represented by Ray LaHood, and that was my understanding.
Ray LaHood isn't a part of the Office of Defects Investigation, is he?
He has responsibility for it.
Is he a part of the Office of Defects
Asked
Investigation?
and answered. Argumentative.
I don't believe so.
He's
but
not an engineer at all.
I don't know the organizational structure.
He's not an engineer at all, is he?
I have no idea.
Well, was that June 10 meeting between Marchionne and those two government officials announced to the press beforehand?
Not that I'm aware of.
Was it announced to safety groups?
Not that I'm aware of.
This whole federal investigation started with a petition from the safety group called the Center for Auto Safety. Isn't that true?
It did originate with them, yes.
Was the Center for Auto Safety invited to that June 10 meeting at O'Hare Airport?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you aware that that Marchionne has claimed that nobody took any notes at that June 10 meeting?
Objective Forum.
That I haven't. I have no knowledge of that.
Are you aware that Marchionne has claimed that there was no written agenda for that meeting?
I'm not aware of that statement.
Are you aware that Marchionne has claimed that no meeting minutes were ever recorded after the fact of that meeting?
I don't know about that statement, but I have no such meeting notice or meeting minutes.
You testified a moment ago that the 50-mile-an-hour rear impact standard came into effect in 2008, I think. Do I have that right?
Object to Objective Foundation.
September of 2008.
2008. If I said 18, I misspoke.
No, I think you said 8.
Okay. Well, isn't it true that the last time FCA sold a vehicle with a rear-mounted gas tank in the United States was model year 2007?
It was over a year prior to the standard changing. So yes, 2007.
And what vehicle was that?
Liberty.
Now, FCA sold a Liberty for model year 2008, didn't it?
I don't recall the model year notes, but it's all on build date for implementation of regulations.
Isn't it true that even after these 2002 to 2007 Liberties were manufactured and sold, FCA continued selling a Jeep Liberty?
Again, the effective dates for any kind of regulatory is the manufacturing date can't be beyond September of 2008 for this regulation. It can be sold after, it can't be manufactured prior to, or after, I'm sorry.
Objection non-responsive. The question is, isn't it true that FCA continued to sell Jeep Liberties for model year 2008?
I don't know. I don't know the model year when it
Well,
stopped.
Did you know that there was a 2008 to 2012 Jeep Liberty?
The new generation, yes.
Where was the gas tank?
Midship.
I want to show you some pictures here. I don't have hard copies, so I'll have to show you on the screen that I believe y'all can see. Can you see the screen?
It's black right now. Okay, now it's up.
Okay. First, I'm going to show you. Well, you recall testifying a minute ago that the trailer hitch could help even at high speed when FCA's lawyer was asking you questions?
Because the testing proved that it did.
Do you recall testifying that the hitch helped at high speed?
For those events, yes.
We'll show you now what I've marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 32. Have you seen Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 before?
Foundation.
I don't recall it, no, sir.
Well, I'll represent to you that Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 is a picture of a Jeep that was driven by Miss Erin Nevitt, who sued FCA when her Jeep caught fire and burned. Can you tell from this picture that the Jeep appears to have burned?
Object to form a foundation.
It looks like it, yes, sir.
Okay, I'll zoom in here for you a little bit. And what is distinctive about the trailer hitch in Plaintiff's Exhibit 32?
That it cracked.
It's broken in two pieces, right?
Yes, sir. It's broken in two.
Does it appear that the trailer hitch in Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 helps Miss Nevitt?
Calls for speculation.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but again, if it's the high energy impact, it wasn't designed to improve that.
Well, actually, I mean, if we look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 32, does this look like a high-speed rear impact?
Calls for speculation.
Honestly, I can't tell.
I mean, there's just not much damage to the Jeep behind where the gas tank
Yeah.
was. is there?
Argumentative.
I
Calls for
don't know,
speculation.
sir.
You don't know?
I can't tell.
Well, let's look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 31, and I'll represent to you that Plaintiff's Exhibit 31 contains a series of photos taken of burned up Jeep Liberties, and they're taken from underneath looking up at the area where the gas tank was. Do you see the top picture there?
Yes, I do.
Underneath it, it says Deanna Gilreath, October 20, 2017, Hamilton, Ohio, right?
Yes, sir.
Does it look to you like the trailer hitch protected the gas tank?
Calls for speculation. Calls for an expert opinion.
Yeah, I'm not a crash expert. I don't know what it would have been if the hitch wasn't there.
Well, can you agree the trailer hitch is bent?
It took a hit
Same
and
objection.
the impact. Whether I'm sure it transferred low to the rails, but you'd have to have an expert do the evaluation on it.
The question is, do you agree the trailer hitch in the top picture on Plaintiff's Exhibit 31 is bent?
Calls for
That's-
same objections.
Yes, it's bent, as is anything that gets impacted.
And it's bent such that the corner of it is back there where the gas tank's supposed to be, isn't it?
Same objections.
It's traveled forward, yes.
Let's look at the next picture here. This is another underside of a Jeep Liberty. That trailer hitch is bent too, isn't it?
Yes, so is the
objections.
whole vehicle.
Does it look like that trailer hitch protected the gas tank?
Same
I
objections.
can't make the conclusion. It could have been better without it. I don't know.
Let's look at the bottommost picture in Plaintiff's Exhibit 31. And I'll represent to you, this is another 2002-2007 Jeep Liberty. Is that trailer hitch bent?
Same objections.
Yes, sir.
You agree it's bent such that the corner of it is back where the gas tank was supposed to be?
Same objections.
Yes, it's traveled forward.
Let me show you what's been marked as Plan Exhibit 21, which I'll represent to you is a picture of Deanna Guillory's Jeep Liberty. You see the trailer hitch there?
I do.
It's bent, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Do you see that black stuff with some sort of white charring in it near the trailer hitch?
Same objections.
I do.
Would you be surprised to learn that that is the remnants of Deanna Guillory's plastic trailer gas tank?
Same objections.
I mean, I can't be for sure, but it looks like it could be, yes.
Does it look like the trailer hitch in Plan Exhibit 21 protected Deanna Guillory's gas tank?
Same objections.
Again, at the limits of it, I'm not sure if it helped or hurt. I don't know. I can't tell without being, having an expert do it.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
I don't have any others.
That concludes the depot.
The time is 12:09 and we're off the record.